I'm Dr. Ryan Alva. As the world grapples with Russian atrocities and war crimes in Bucha, yesterday the United Nations suspended Russia from its seat in the Human Rights Council by an overwhelming margin. It marked the first time that a permanent member of the Security Council has been removed from a major UN body. This was something that Moscow vigorously lobbied against. Russia has even warned smaller countries that anything short of a vote of support will be viewed as betrayal. Now, this threat comes as Putin's spokesman considered in an interview with Sky News that things are not looking well for their military.
You've lost thousands of troops, you've lost 6 generals, hundreds of tanks and other equipment. It's a humiliation, really, isn't it?
No. It's a wrong understanding of what is going on.
But what is wrong about what I've just said?
Well, nearly everything.
Well, but you've lost thousands of troops, yeah? Let's go through it. You've lost thousands of troops. How many troops have you lost?
We have significant losses of troops, and it's a huge tragedy for us.
Ukraine's foreign minister made the critical point at the latest NATO meeting in Brussels that currently it is all about oil.
As long as the West, let's put it this way, continues buying Russian gas and oil, it is supporting Ukraine with one hand, while supporting Russia war machine with another hand.
And this is despite the West's continued efforts to further isolate Russia. The U.S. Senate passed legislation stripping Russia of its favored nation trade status and also banned Russian oil imports. The European Union has agreed to a ban on Russian coal, but debates on Russian oil and gas, which remain controversial, continue. Now, the largest stumbling block in negotiations is Germany, with its heavy dependence on Russian fossil fuel. However, it is important to remember that they are not alone, and any ban will require the consensus of all 27 EU nations. The Minister of Economy of France acknowledged that calling for a halt to Russian oil imports within weeks, adding, the reality is that stopping imports of oil from Russia is what would hurt Russia the most. Now, Rachel Maddow, in her best-selling book, Blowout, writes, and I quote, "The dependence on the fossil fuel industry and the way that it inflates Russia's standing is a key ingredient in the destruction that we are seeing today. The oil and gas industry left on its own devices will mindlessly follow its own nature. It will make tons of money. It will corrupt and corrupt and sabotage democratic governance. In some countries that depend on oil for their livelihood, eventually become among the most economically troubled, the most authoritarian, and the most conflict-ridden in the world." End of quote. Now, the global community unanimously agreed that Russia is now essentially a pariah state, should be cut off from global community and not be on the Human Rights Council. But is this enough? No, it is not. It does not affect Russia in any way. The one thing that could get Russia, though, is cutting off the money, and the money all comes from oil. Lucas Kunz is a former Marine officer at the Pentagon, and he was in charge of direct arms control negotiations with NATO and Russia back in 2014. In an interview with MSNBC, he stated that his efforts to get our allies to take a firm position against Russia's treaty violations and invasions were fruitless.
They actually got more reliant on Russian gas, not less. And so what they did was they expected, they were getting this cheap gas, and they expected the United States taxpayer to subsidize that gas by sending more and more troops over to protect them. And now they expect the Ukrainians to subsidize that gas with their blood. It's a tragedy, and it needs to be stopped.
Tom, it does undercut the position of the West and the forthright support when we're just watching, bodies in the street.
Now, every euro that countries like Germany pay for the Russian oil and gas is being recycled right into the war machine that Russia is using to mass murder Ukrainians. And to truly understand it, we should take a look at the numbers and the dollar amounts spent on Russian oil and gas. For instance, the European Union's dependence on oil, on Russian oil, it is $850 million a day. That's what they are paying for oil and gas, and $20 million a day for coal alone. And this is specifically by design. It is all Putin's design, and the Western Europe fell for it. And Timothy Snyder is the Richard C. Levin Professor of History at the Yale University and a permanent fellow at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. In an interview with MSNBC, he asserted that outright military defeat of Russia by Ukrainian forces, essentially aided by the West, is the only way out of this conflict and an enduring peace.
I mean, I think it's pretty simple logically. If Russia wins the second stage of the war in the Donbass, then they're going to keep going. If there's some kind of stagnation, that's a continuation of the war. The only way for this to end is for Putin to feel subjectively that his position is threatened. And the only way for him to feel that subjectively is for Russia to be defeated on the battlefield. I think the problem that we have is that we're not used to winning. We don't expect the Ukrainians to win. We're not used to winning. But whether we like, whether we're used to it or not, it's the only way to end this war. If you want peace, you want a victory, and you want that victory to be just as quick as it can possibly be.
I think we need a paradigm shift away from talking about stagnations and escalations. Putin is sincere when he talks about wanting to win by May 9th, which means there is a critical month ahead of us. Therefore, the West, in my opinion, should send as many arms and all kinds of assistance as soon as possible, in the hope that this war can be brought to an end. I mean, Donbass is a tragedy. Russians are now trying to take cities that they were also trying to take in 2014. Nobody in Moscow cares at all about Donbass, but they're fighting for it because they have to be victorious somewhere. The only way for this to end is for them not to win that victory. Now, the Russians have forgotten that the Ukrainians were on their side when they won the Second World War. It has both strategic and moral implications. This Russian business of calling the Ukrainians Nazis and fascists as the Russian army perpetuates the exact kinds of policies that we remember Nazism and fascism with is not just perverse. It is like a second version of the crime itself. And what is unique about 2022 amidst all this war is that Ukraine have won the battle for Kyiv. As a nation, they have asserted themselves as existing in a state that does things that the rest could not anticipate. This is true for Russians and Americans alike. And in that way, we are in a new historical epoch. The American left specializes in being right and losing. And the American right specializes in being wrong and winning. It kind of helps to be correct and win every once in a while. We must think about the converse. Think what happens if the Ukrainians lose. Think what happens if they never fought. Our democracy around the world would be rocking on its heels right now. Therefore, it is not just about Ukraine and Russia. It is also about the rest of us. We all need Ukraine to prevail on this battle, on the battlefield. For a minute, imagine a universe in which Zelensky and his soldiers flee to Lviv. The government collapses, people have no leadership, and Russia is essentially occupying Ukraine as colonized power. And we would be looking at a completely different set of circumstances right now. It is because of their brave actions that this has not happened. And I think it is critical to keep focused on that.